Continue.
So let's start with what are the Azure core storage services? What are the core storage services that you can get from Azure? The first one will be the Azure Blob. The Azure Blob, the Blob storage, as written here. So I would let me go back to the next course. Okay, so these are the core Azure storage services. So under these services, we have what we call the Azure Blob, we have the Azure Files, we have the Azure Queues, then we have Azure Tables, then we have Azure Disks. All these make up the Azure storage services, the core storage services. And why do we need the storage services? The reason we need the storage services because sometimes you need to store files in a structured way, and sometimes you need to have unstructured because we're dealing with cloud. And when we talk about cloud, you need to have a form of storage. Remember that in the last class, I mentioned to you that some of the 4 core services that Azure provides for you is 1, computing, 2, networking, 3, storage. So if you remember, so today we're going to be looking into some of the core services that Azure, as Microsoft Azure, provides for you, which is 1, storage, 2, computing, 3, networking, and then the 4th one, am I forgetting that thing now? Yeah, so the 3 services that the 4 services that you have, 4 services, computing, networking, and databases. Yeah. So today we'll be looking at, last week we delved a bit into computing, where we talked about virtual machines. But today we'll be going a bit more into storage. Then we will go into the networking a bit, where we talk about VNets. But we'll start here with the storage. So here, the Azure Storage Platform has these data services. 1 is the Azure Blobs, 2 Azure Files, 3 Azure Queues, 4 Azure Disks, 5 Azure Tables. And I will just simply highlight what these things do. The Azure Blob is just like simply trying to a platform that enables you to upload files that will be treated as objects. I'll take it again. The Azure Blob is a massive object store for text and binary data. This, one of the core things it does is an object store for text and binary data. And you can see here, they said it includes support for big data analysis. It is, and how does it do this? It does it through, how does it perform this? It does it through the data lake storage Gen 2. This is how the Azure Blob works. I'll break it down again. The Azure Blob is usually for uploading files. But what happens is that when it uploads these files, it treats them as objects. It treats these files as objects. It gives you an opportunity to have all kinds of files. You're not, in this case, in the Azure Blob, you're not interested in how to resize your file, say PDF, structure it in this way, or say you are dealing with PDF, or you're dealing with docx documents, that, or you're dealing with PNGs. It's not bothered about that. All that, it's like a serverless, it's actually a serverless It's a serverless form of storage that enables you to upload files and they are treated as objects. There's no restriction as to the structure. That's why if you can see here, the first thing here is for text and binary data. The second one, the Azure files. This one enables you to share cloud on premises deployments. What do we mean by this? It means that you're able to share your files. When you put your files using on this Azure files, you're able to go from, for example, I'm using a virtual machine in zone A. And I say or let me not use zone A. I'm using a virtual machine in London office. And I want to connect with Lagos office. I have deployed an Azure file that would enable me to make file shares for maybe SharePoint. Or maybe there are other applications we use, in-house applications like SharePoint that my company uses. Or we have content sharing platforms like Freshworks. So, and we host it on Azure. So this kind of situation now, we have the managed file shares for cloud and on-premises deployments. So this tells you that these are the kind of services, data services that you would use for your storage. Then we have the Azure queues. This one enables you, is a messaging store for reliable messaging between application components. What do we mean by this? It means that you're able to transfer messages from one application to another application. And the good thing about this is that the Azure is that you have no SQL store. It is schemaless, but it is structured. When we talk of Azure queues, it is schemaless, but it is structured data. So for example, I want to carry all the names of people in this class plus their age. I have structured, that is a structured data. But when I talk about, when I'm trying to store it, and I store it, it doesn't, and I don't use any database, no SQL store, it is a schemaless storage. That's what the Azure queue does. It is a schemaless storage, but it is structured data. When we talk about the schemaless storage, I hope you realize what I mean. I mean that there's no SQL, it's not referring to any database to pull out data, to read or to write. Let me just go back a bit to just explain what, when we talk about, when you are pulling data and you are reading and writing. There's something called IOPS, which is input-output operations per second, for input-output operations per second. So the faster you are able to read and write, the faster you're able to read and write. What do you mean by read and write? The faster you're able to copy and write things determines a whole lot when we talk about storage. The faster you're able to access files is very key. So when you're choosing data services, when we talk about when you're choosing data services, these are some of the considerations you have to put into place. These are some of the features you have to think about. How easy it is for me to access my data when I need it? How easy for it is it for me to read and write, to copy, to remove, to upload, to edit? So these are some of the features that you need to put in your mind when you are talking about storage services. And then the next one is the Azure Disk. This one is a block level storage for volume for Azure VM. This is the one we usually use when we create virtual machines. It just does automatic storage. Automatic storage. Then we talk about the Azure tables. No SQL table option for structured. what is a non-relational data. Say I want to add things that are not, data that is not related. That's what these Azure tables do. It's a messaging store for reliable messaging between applications, such that between applications, sorry, is a schemaless storage. It enables you no SQL table for structure. You are not using any SQL table in this case. That's when we talk about Azure tables. What is the benefit of Azure storage? One of it is the fact that it's durable, it is secure, it is scalable, it is managed, it is accessible. So I'll just focus on the accessible part. Data in Azure storage is accessible from anywhere in the world. You can use HTTP or HTTPS. So you see that there are different programming languages here that can be used to merge your API with the Azure storage. And this would enable you to have your data as quick as possible. Good thing about it is that Azure storage is very scalable based on performance and based on performance tiers. So there are two types of performance tiers I would like to talk about. But before we go back there, okay, let's just go over some of these things here. I've summarized what Azure blobs are. Remember that it's an object storage solution for the cloud. It is text or binary data. It doesn't really require. So let me tell you what it's ideal for. Blob storage is ideal for saving images or documents directly to a browser. It is ideal for storing distributed access. For example, you have a company in London, a company in Lagos, a company in Abuja. It is ideal for streaming video for distributed access. So that means that different people in different locations have access to files. So this is one of the functions, the core functions of the blob storage. It is ideal for you to stream videos and audios. Blob storage is important, is necessary. It helps you to do backup. It helps you to restore. It helps you to do disaster recovery. If you remember in the last class, we talked about disaster recovery, where, for example, you always need a disaster recovery plan as a tech organization, because something can happen to all your data, or as a data analyst, or even as a data administrator. Something can happen to your data, or even as a cloud person, something can happen to your data. You always need a backup. That's why when we create virtual machines, we also create virtual machines that are used for disaster recovery. So alongside creating a virtual machine, maybe for London office, usually most times best practice is to create another another virtual machine that is for this disaster recovery, that serves as a backup and restore, disaster recovery, archiving, and all that. It's also important. Blob storage is used for data for analysis on premises. When we talk of on premises, means that it's hosted with you. It's not far away from where you are, from where the consumer or the customer is. So here, note this, that blob storage can be accessed from anywhere in the world. You can use HTTP or HTTPS. You can access blob storage. Once you have the users or client applications can access blobs using the URLs, using the Azure Storage REST API, using PowerShell, using the command line prompts, that's the CLI, using the Azure Storage Clients Library. These are ways you can access these applications. You can access applications through blob storage. I hope you know that different programming languages have the way they access Azure. So that's another part but let me just, because like I know that Ruby, sometimes it works with the REST API, the Azure Storage REST API effectively more than. So here you have users or client applications can access blobs via URLs, via APIs, via PowerShell, via command line prompts, interface, Azure Storage Client libraries. So these are the ways you can access blob storage. It can be accessed from anywhere in the world. So through your HTTPS, you can just type HTTPS and you can, that's when you create your virtual machine. I remember last week we talked about how you can share your virtual machine as a file, and you can now, how you can download it, sorry, and share the link. So this is this is what it's actually all about. And you can access your blob storage. So we have the blob storage tiers. Data stored in the cloud can grow at an exponential pace. And that is very, very key. So here I'll just talk about the tiers for your blob storage. What this does is that it helps you store data in the most cost-effective way. The most cost-effective way. So when we talk about Azure storage, we talk about the accessing tiers. What do the access tiers do? We access tiers. We talk about the premium tiers. And what these things do is that the access tiers, the three types, I'll just describe the three tiers of access tiers. This enables you to have access to your data. So the truth about these things is that you need to understand what you are trying to design, who are your customer base. Are you dealing with a small company, or are you dealing with a large company that has over 1,000 people accessing data? Or are you dealing with people you're just dealing with 50 people in one small location, or 50 people in different locations, but the kind of data they access is huge. So these are some of the considerations you need to put into when you're talking about storage services. There are three types of access tiers that we have. We have the storage, the standard storage. Under the standard storage, we have hot, cool, and archive. Hot, cool, and archive. Here they describe it in 4 levels. We have the hot access tier, the cool access tier, the cold access tier. We have the archive access tier. What these do is that the difference of all these 4 here is just about how frequently you access your data. Timing. It's about timing. The first one, the hot access tier, refers to optimize for storing data that is frequently used. For example, images for your website. So, sometimes whenever I create websites, what I like to do as a practice is that I try to save the pictures, all the pictures, everything, all the pictures I'm going to create for that website. I try to save it in a folder and I tag it as .index. That's what I like to do when I'm creating websites, and I always prefer, I feel it's best practice to .index or use other titles. But the point is that here we're talking about, they say, for example, your website. This is for data that is frequently used. So because many times as a developer, or you tend to, sorry, this will shift a bit to a bit of coding, programming a bit. So I hope you have some basic knowledge about coding, but if you don't, let me just explain it in layman's in lay terms, in simple terms. What this refers to is that hot is data that you are accessing frequently. So if I am accessing, or for example, I'm an accountant, I'm accessing, or in a company, one of the data that I'll access frequently is people's salaries as an accountant of an organization. Or if I'm the web designer, or for a fashion website, images, clothes are the things that I would access. So based on how frequent I access that data, that is what we refer to as the hot access tier. It is hot. They access it frequently. So just note, hot, it is accessed frequently. Cool, it is less accessed. In this case of cool, it is data that is infrequently accessed and is stored for at least 30 days. So that's where you store cool access tier, something that you don't frequently use, and maybe you just want to store it for the next 30 days. You just want to be accessing that data for the next 30 days. Something like invoices, or something like if you're a business that you don't really do a lot of transactions, receipts, maybe once in 30 days you access those receipts. Or as the accountant, you access, most accountants don't usually have access to HR documents. And so a lot of times you can see an accountant say, oh, that situation can be set up for that's a cool access tier for somebody that does not access that information frequently. Then the cold access tier for storing data that's infrequently accessed and stored for at least 90 days. Then we have the archive access tier. So I just described the cold. The cold one, the difference with the cold and the cool is that one is 30 days, one is 90 days. And then the archive access tier is, this one is 180 days. It is rarely accessed. You rarely use this data. You rarely access this storage. So that's why you use the storage method. Use this access tier for blob storage, because you are not frequently going there. It can be stored for 180 days. Note the word stored 180 days with flexible latency requirements. For example, it has a long backup time. So you can back up things with the archive access tier, something that you're not really going to frequently. So one of the things that is common to all this is that these things can be set at the account level. You can set the hot, you can set the cool, you can set the cold, you can set the archive at the account level. So you can set the hot, cool, and cold at the account level, but the archive is not available at the account level. That one you need to do, it requires some subscription level that is higher. The hot, cool, cold, and archive tiers can be set at the blob level during or after upload. Then we have the data in cool and cold access tier can tolerate slightly lower availability, but requires high durability, retrieval latency, and throughput characteristics similar to the hot data. So what this means is that when you use data in cool and cold, it does not have to be available always. All that is needed is the retrieval latency. That's the ability to retrieve it when you need it. But the archive storage, you have to note this, that the archive storage stores data offline and offers you the largest storage costs. but it has the highest cost to rehydrate and access data. Rehydrate and access data. So when we talk about rehydrating a blob, what we simply mean is moving a blob out of archive into another tier. This usually takes some time. So when we say we are rehydrating a blob, we are moving a blob out of archive and we're taking it to another tier. So for example, we're now saying you have something that you stored in archive. And you're now saying, okay, no, I want to take it now to cold. Because now this data, or you want to take it to hot. This data now, I'm going to be accessing very frequently. That's what we refer to as rehydrating a blob. So, but also the high cost to rehydrate and access data. That's what. So this stores offline, meaning it doesn't require much internet for storage. It doesn't really use internet for storage. So we talk about the Azure files. These Azure files are fully managed file shares in the cloud. The Azure files can be mounted concurrently by cloud or on-premises deployments. So these SMB Azure files are accessible from your Windows and other things. The Azure files, one of the key benefits is that it supports protocols like NFS and SMB, meaning that you can replace your on-premises files without worrying about application compatibility. So, and you know, in the coding world, sometimes you need to bother, you always bother about compatibility when you are storing things or when you are talking about access. How frequently am I able to access this data? How frequently am I able to, how can I merge this application with this other application? There are some applications that cannot be merged with other applications. Like recently, I remember my office were thinking of how we could use WebEx to work with our Microsoft Teams, because there were certain features in WebEx that we needed to work with our Microsoft Teams. That's Microsoft Teams as Teams that you know, these Microsoft Teams that we're using for meeting. So that's what we talk about, application compatibility. So one of the things that file shares does, it does not think about that. It just helps you to share regardless of which what's it called, application you are dealing with. It can be created without the need to manage a hardware. That's one of the benefits of the Azure files. You don't have to start thinking of where to create a server that will manage the hardware for this. Then it is familiar, it runs, it is the applications running Azure can access data. You can access the data easily. You can use existing code to migrate existing applications. You can use an existing code. What do you mean by this? Familiar programming means that you can have code. When I mean code, programming language from one programming language, and you can migrate it to another programming language using this Azure storage client libraries. Or you could use the Azure Storage REST API. So this allows you to merge languages, familiar programming applications running in the same form. We have the Azure queues, we have the Azure disks, we have the Azure tables. I'll just quickly run through this. I had earlier explained, but let me just go back again. The Azure storage for large numbers of messages. So imagine like which company can we refer to that does a lot of messaging? Okay, I can't think of any example right now. But one of the things is that this is for storing large numbers of messages. That's what the Azure queue does. You can access the messages from anywhere in the world using HTTP or HTTPS. Hope you know that HTTP is the standard internet protocol. And HTTPS is with the secured one, and HTTP is not. So the S there for HTTPS is security. It's more secure than the other one, but they are all the same. A queue can contain as many messages as your storage account has room for. So this is one of the good things about this Azure queue. You can have up to 64 kilobytes in storage. Then we have the Azure disks. This one, like I earlier explained, is for your virtual machines. It's for your virtual machine. It says it's like they are the same as a physical disk, but they are virtualized. It's like the way you have your disk operating system, those operating systems you have, those desktops you have. But imagine having it virtualized. That's what the Azure disk is like. That's what it does. That's the function it performs. We manage, all you have to do is provision the disk, and Azure will take care of the rest. Provision the disk, and Azure will take care of the rest. So this, we'll do it later on, some of these practicals of these situations. Then the Azure tables stores large amount of structured data. So you know that data is stored in tables. The Azure tables you have structured data. Let me delve into a bit of the data science. You have structured data, you have unstructured data, you have relational data and non-relational data. So one thing you should know is that the Azure Table Storage stores large amounts of structured data. But good thing is that no SQL data store that accepts authenticated calls from inside and outside the Azure cloud. So what this does is that the Azure Table is now able to build hybrid or multi-cloud solution. So you know that these Azure tables are usually for storing your structured, non-relational data, things that do not relate. That is one of the good things that Azure tables can do for you, things that do not relate. So, so this is the next part, is where to create a blog. Okay, let me go back to a bit of our practical session to create So one of the things you have to note is that Azure Storage is a Microsoft managed service providing cloud storage. It's a cloud storage. You don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't touch it. It's virtualized. So that's what it is. So we have the subscription. We'll still go with the action pack for lab. Then if we had another type of subscription, we would have selected it. Then we have the resource group. This is, we can choose the VM we create, the storage account name. Can decide to use RG1 store. There's this name I used. Let me go back to use action. Okay, so we have the storage account name action pack 1. I named it as action pack 1. Then we would use the region. We are in sometimes I like to use East Europe. What's that? Or West Europe. Because it seems to be closer to us in Nigeria. Let me see the options. So hope you know that these regions also affect the pricing for your storage, costs of your storage. It's important to know that when selecting the regions. This is okay. Okay, let me just use this US list West. Couldn't find the East Europe. Okay, let's just use North Europe. So you can see that this has been deployed to an Azure extended zone. Let me use the neutral zone, West US. Then primary service. Primary service, you can decide to choose an Azure blob storage or an Azure data lake storage Gen 2. Remember, I mentioned that the Azure blob can walk through, when you're using data analytics, can walk through the data lake storage Gen 2. So here we'll click on Azure blob storage. That is our primary service. Then here, performance, we'll click on standard, because standard and premium. So in this case, we have what we call standard tier and premium. The difference between the two is just about the operations, the one with the higher input output operations. That is to say, how fast is it? How fast can we access, can we read and write? That is, how fast can it store? How fast can it upload? How fast can it download? Let me put it in that term. How fast can it read and write? Because we're referring to storage and databases and data storage. So how fast can it read and write? That's what we call IOPS. IOPS. The higher the IOPS, the faster, and the more money you pay. The lower the high OPS, that means that it takes time to read and write. So you can see the premium here. It said recommended for scenarios that require low latency. That means the ability to read and write. That's the ability to copy and bring out, to the ability to copy stuff, to read stuff, and to write is, in this scenario, requires low latency. Low latency in the sense that it does not require much speed, much bandwidth. Let me put it that way, much bandwidth to do that. For the general purpose, this is for most scenarios, because this one is general purpose. It enables you to, it has a higher read and write than the premium. The premium too also has a higher It also has a high IOPS. That's the input output operations per second. Input output operations per second. It's important to note that's how fast it reads, how fast it writes. So next one, the good thing, again, another difference between them is that one can be stored on a hard disk, like the standard. The standard stores on hard disk drives. That means that the data is close together. And this one, it saves money. That's why we're going for the standard. The premium, the data is a bit, it's not like it's stored in a solid state. It has low latency. The speed and this thing is low performance for the premium tier. So this is the scenario. So it's important that you also understand the scenario you are dealing with, because the standard one works with HDD, the premium one works with SSDs, which is the solid state drive disks. Sorry, the solid state drives. That's what the premium works with, and the standard works with the HDDs, the hard disk drives. So okay, let's use standard, because we're trying to build something that can last, something that we can share, the data we can get data fast, and something that is scalable. That means that we can expand it anytime we want easily if the team passes 50 people. So you also have to think of the kind of organization you are dealing with or what you are working with. If you're dealing with 100 people or you're dealing with 1,000 people that are accessing data, that's what would also determine your storage method, your storage account. So we have the redundancy, the local redundant storage. Did I explain that? Okay, I don't think I explained that. So we have the LRS, we have the GRS, we have the ZRS, we have the GZRS. One of the things is that a low cost option with basic protection against server rack and the drive failures. So this LRS is usually recommended for non-critical scenarios that they don't, if anything happens, then you're not bothered if you lose the file, or if something happens to the virtual machine and you lose files, you're not bothered. Then the geo-redundant is a failover capability in a secondary recommended for backup scenarios. That's what the geo-redundant storage does. So in this case, we are creating an account, a storage account that is on-premise. So locally redundant, we are putting it on this host, on this machine. We're not taking it anywhere. We're not connecting to anywhere. We're not connected to we're just connecting to the internet. So in this case, we will use the lowest cost option with basic protection, which is the LRS. You can use the zone redundant storage. This one, you do it based on your data center level failure. So this option is an intermediate option with protection against data center level failures. So sometimes you have data center level failure. That's if you have a data center in Lagos office, London office, Abuja office, is recommended for high availability scenarios. So imagine like an MTN. If they want to do a storage account, they will not go for small storage accounts. They will definitely have to use the zone redundant storage, or they'll use geo-zone redundant storage, because this one offers GRS and ZRS for critical data scenarios. Because anything that happens to their storage, Only God knows what will be lost. The millions of dollars that will be lost. Even on their database. A lot of data. People's information, phone numbers that they can't, they need to take them a while to recover. Except they have, yes, they may have backup scenarios available, but this will be ideal for someone like a company like GeoZone Redundant Storage, like MTN. So I'll choose that, then go up again. Okay, next. Advanced. In this case, we're not going to touch anything because it's already on the, say, configure security settings that impact your storage. That's what we do here. So now you have to think of, yes, so I'm storing information, I'm storing data, but I also have to think of the security. How secured is this data that I'm storing? So this requires secure transfer for REST API operations. I've ticked that. So this is enabling anonymous access on individual containers. Geez, I should have created a container for doing this. But let's go on. So this blob storage, I'll leave everything like this. Hot, because you can see the options I was talking about. Hot, cool, cold. Hot, cool, cold under access tiers. Hot, we have the hot, we have the cool, we have the cold. Remember, all these three have to do with how frequently is the data being accessed. So in this case, we'll just use hot because our data is hot. It's being accessed very frequently. Then we'll ignore the hierarchical namespace. It's already okay. Let's just name it. Give it according to this, arranges according to the semantics, uses workloads, enables access control lists. Or do we want to activate that? No, let me leave it. The other one is the access protocols. When we talk about protocols, you know, if you remember this in routing, in networking, we have routing protocols. These are the protocols which convey data through IP address, using IP address to a particular server or device. But here we're talking about access protocols. One of the access protocols we have in Azure is the blob and data lake Gen 2. But in this case, these ones are provisioned by default. So we'll leave that. Then we'll come down to the cross-tenant replication. The cross-tenant replication. When we talk about replication, we're talking about how many redundant parts should be made and where. How many redundant parts should be made and where? That's what we're referring to. And where? Where should they be put? So this is this is set up. Okay, then we go to networking. It's already clicked. Enable public access from all networks. Private endpoints. Add private endpoints. So what this does is that it allows you to have a private connection to this resource. This will be talked about later. Then we check the data protection. This is 7. Enable soft delete for file shares. 7. Days to retain deleted containers. 7. days to retain deleted blobs, 7. So if I delete a blob and I want it to still retain, it was, I can say that's why I set it as 7 days. Encryption. Hope you know what encryption does. It provides a form of security. We have the encryption type, the Microsoft managed keys. We have the customer managed keys. Then we have the enable support for customer managed keys. We already clicked on blobs and files only. So if we click on all service types, what will happen is that the blobs, all the blobs we have that we're creating plus this, that's for the storage account, all the blobs we're creating plus the files, tables, and queues will be the service types for this. And this is very expensive too. So we'll go to review and create. Validation in progress. We wait, give it some time. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to validate the storage account. Okay, so you can see our storage account has been created here. Advanced, our security enabled, secure transfer enabled. So it means that when you're transferring, like we have WhatsApp that does secure transfer end to end. And we have the encryption. We only enabled the customer managed keys to be managed by the file blobs and files only. So you click on create. So now this is initializing this deployment to a resource. That's the storage account that we have created. It's assigning it to a resource group. Remember that here. Let me see, we already have existing resource groups. Okay, RG1 here. Deployment is in progress. Okay, these are some of the practicals that you guys will be engaging in. It's quite straightforward because Azure has some of these practicals. They are just straightforward because you're not really selecting many options. It's just that you need to know what you are dealing with so that you're not going to select the one that will bill you and you spend all your money for your subscription. That's just the difference. That's what you have to be careful about. So with this, I hope you have been convinced that it is very easy. And you see this option here where you can free training from Microsoft Azure to create an Azure storage account, 30 minutes. Then how to connect your app to an Azure storage. How to connect your app to an Azure storage. Should I take that? Or should we move on to the virtual nets? Okay, let's go into virtual nets. I've dealt with storage. Okay, let me just try and exhaust everything about storage. So remember, we talked about the Azure blob storage, which is object serverless storage, stores very large files and amounts of unstructured files. Unstructured files means that I can put my invoice, I can put my data for my research project, I can put things that are not related. And in this case, one of the good things about the Azure blob storage is that you are not bothered about resizing. You're not bothered about the file system protocol. You're not bothered about the structure. It has unlimited storage. The good thing about this blob is that you pay for what you store. you pay for what you store. So when people talk about the storage accounts, you see why, if you look at when we're creating storage accounts, I chose the blob because it enables you to pay for what you store. You are not paying for what you don't store. You pay for what you store. Then the Azure disk storage, I'll go back again just to highlight this before we are done, is the virtual volume. In this one, you have the SSD and the HDD encryption. This happens that this thing stores your volume too, but you need to attach volumes to VMs. In this case now, Azure disk storage, sometimes you have to do some resizing of volumes in your virtual machine. And when we talk about this disk storage, it's basically what we're simply saying is that we have a hard drive in the cloud, sorry. The summary of this Azure disk storage is that we're saying we have a hard drive that is stored in the cloud that's attached to a virtual machine. I'll take it again. We're just saying that we have a hard drive, which is the Azure disk storage, that is stored in the cloud, and it is attached to a virtual machine. And we know that a virtual machine can be hosted in the cloud. And you know that the cloud is usually not touched. That's it. It's usually in a location you don't even know many times, but sometimes, okay, that's another thing I'm digressing into. But what I'm trying to say is that when we talk about the cloud as is, we talk about IaaS as a infrastructure as a service. We talk about PaaS and SaaS, all platform as a service, and we talk about SaaS. All these things that we mentioned, they are all tied to, and we're talking about virtual machines. All these are different methods. So virtual machines are like a form that has like a hard drive that is stored in the cloud. And you know, we have talked about different cloud models in the previous classes. I think Steve had taken the people on cloud, the different types of cloud services that we have. Then the Azure file storage, we're talking about a shared volume that you can access and manage like a file server. So when we talk about this Azure file storage, we are just saying that it's something that you can access anytime like a file server. It's like using multiple servers to use one hard drive. That's what you do with the Azure file storage. Multiple servers using one hard drive. That's what happens with the Azure file storage. Then the Azure queue storage is managing messaging queue, delivering messages between applications. So for example, I'm delivering a message from my SharePoint to my Teams, to Teams, to Outlook, maybe for different purposes in the same company or the same premise, the same location, or the same on-prem, the same data center. So instead of creating a storage for each, for SharePoint, for this, for that, I'm just creating a form where these applications can deliver messages between themselves, can communicate within themselves. Then the Azure table storage is a wide column, no SQL database, unstructured data. It's independent of any schema. So I'll just highlight some other things as a form of summary, because so that we can understand. We have the Azure Data Box. What this does is that this enables you to move terabytes, petabytes, different things that are large of that nature, like terabytes. It uses a physical device to transfer large files. So in this case, like using a flash drive, But what happens is that this file transfer can happen between maybe Lagos office to Abuja office, saying I want to transfer certain files, or maybe accounting, or all the staff files that contain history of all the staff that have worked in this organization from day one of the organization. Maybe the organization is a 5-year-old organization. So I want to know all the people that have worked for this, so their names, their age, where they live, their address, and all those things. And you have it stored in a large file. So instead of sending this file through the internet, you can use a physical device to transfer. That's what the Azure data box does. It enables you to do that kind of transfer. Then we have the Azure archive storage. This technology enables you to store things for years to come, for several years to come. You're not, you're not restricted by time. You can store it and go to sleep. So, these few points of mine, I think we have concluded storage. It's important that we know the features and different pricing models for storage. We have the general purpose V1, the legacy, general purpose V2, version 2. We have the blob storage, we have blob storage, we have file storage. All file storage, all these ones are the different features with their pricing for storage accounts. We also have okay. Okay. So we will create a container. Let me create a container. Send that container option here again. So you can see there are other options here that you can play around with, which is storage actions. This performs serverless storage action by processing up to millions of objects. It means that you can assign, it's used for a large scale of objects. When we talk about data, then we have the redundancy. Here are redundancies, locally redundant storage, LRS. So it is stored within a premises. You can see there's data center type and status available. Location, West US 2. So these are some of the considerations that you make when you are creating your storage accounts. We will go on to, okay, let me say, okay, let me go ahead of this. Okay, data storage. So you can see here we have under data storage by the left, we have containers, we have file shares, we have queues, we have tables. So under containers, I will click on this. I want to create a container. Let's give this container RG1, or okay, cohorts. Oh, I even forgot to name that. Should have even named that other distinct cohorts. It's So now we're creating cohort 6. Cohort 6 container. Okay, I'll just leave it like that. Okay, cohort 6, then create. So we're creating a container and we title our blog story. As I have created it before, or I created the destination. So what this does is that I can upload a file from my desktop. I can upload a file from my desktop. Simply put, this is what I can do. So this is it. As a browse for files, I'll just look for files maybe on my download. Let me just do this. Okay. So you can see this one file selected, use of fonts. So this will be uploaded on into the container, which is now on our blog, the blog storage. Said uploading on blog. So you can see now we have this uploaded on blog. As easy as ABC. So, and you know, remember that the reason we're using blog is because of how it is a serverless storage. It stores large files, unstructured files. So I can bring different kinds of files here that are not even connected. And I'm not going to be thinking about, oh, you can see this is a .html. I can bring a .pdf. I'm not going to be bothered about the file system protocols. And I will pay based on what I store. So let me just delete this because if I keep it here, payments will be increasing on the subscription. So let me just delete. So you pay based on what you store using the Azure blob storage that we selected earlier. So, okay, I think that's pretty much most of it for our, we go over to VNet so that our time is the. And one thing I just want to explain is the Azure File Sync. The Azure File Sync is a service that allows you to cache Azure files. It's like a OneDrive. Picture it as a OneDrive for your files. So the Azure File Sync enables you to just search it. So yeah, so this is what it is. The Azure File Sync. You can see this here. We can deploy an Azure File Sync. What this will do is that it allows you to cache Azure files, file shares. It's an on-premises Windows server or cloud virtual machine. It's an on-premises Windows or Windows server or a cloud virtual machine. If I click here and I say, I provide a name and I leave it as I change the region. I will just simply click next, review and create automatically to create and deploy an Azure file sync. What this does, this acts like a OneDrive for Azure. It allows you to store file shares, files. Imagine you having a OneDrive for your files, images, Word documents, and all the likes. That's what your Azure file sync does. It may cost you a bit, but it's still valid and useful. So, okay, so I've shown you how to store files in blob storage. We will go on to the virtual network. This is virtual networks. Here we already have this virtual network here. But let me explain a bit before. Okay, so we will go on to the Azure Virtual Private Network. Okay, so I noticed that this is a very interesting part too. It enables you to extend your on-premise network into the Microsoft Cloud over a private connection. So I don't know how many of you have used VPNs. And if you have, then this would be like what we call the VPNs for Azure. What this Azure Express Route does is that it creates private connections between Azure data centers and infrastructures on your premises. So note that this one is different because it creates private connections between Azure data centers on your infrastructure within your premises. So for example, I have a network. My network in Banana Island versus my network along with my network in Ikoyi, VI, alongside a network in London. And my data center is in Ikoyi or Banana. My data center is in Ikoyi. And I want to create a private connection between my Azure data centers, or I have several data centers in these locations. So instead of having to think of how this data center will connect to this data center will connect to this other data center, I simply create an Azure Express route. What this would do is that it would serve as a connection between the private connections. It can take the bandwidth that this thing takes, this Azure Express route, is that it takes like over up to 50 something. The bandwidth is over 10 gig per second. So if you note here, it says with Express route, you can establish connections to Microsoft Cloud services, such as Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365. This feature allows you to connect offices, data centers to the Microsoft Cloud. So now what will happen is that each location, maybe my London office, my Lagos office, my Banana Island office, my Ikoyi office, I will create an express route circuit that will connect between these locations. And one of the things that this does is connectivity to Microsoft Cloud Services across regions in a geopolitical region. So what I mean is, within Lagos, I'm joining Ikoyi office, Banana Land office, Yaba office, Ikota office, different locations or regions, as you like to call it, in one geopolitical region. How am I doing that connection? Through the express route, the Azure express route. And it uses Border Gateway Protocol, BGP. It performs dynamic routing. So you're not even thinking, you don't have to be doing a lot of routing and mapping of IP addresses and subnetting here. It enables that to happen very fast and swiftly. One of the things that it does is that it also enables you to have access to these things in regions. So you can have access to your cloud services such as Microsoft Office 365, Microsoft Dynamics 365, your compute services. So you can access your virtual machines in different regions using your Express. And since we're talking about virtual machines in this class too, and we have already been taught how to create virtual machines, it's important that we understand that Azure Express Routes is a very helpful tool that helps us to do virtual cross connections. Simply put, Azure Express Route enables you to do cross connections. Then I'll go on to talk about, so you see, we have the global connectivity, dynamic routing, built-in redundancy, co-location at a cloud exchange, point-to-point internet connection, any-to-any network directly from Express Route site, security considerations. These are some of the importance and benefits you get from the Express Routes, the features and the benefits. You can go over this later on in your spare time. It is one of the good things is that it can do as much as 10 gigabytes per second, which is fast. The bandwidth is fast. So you are not bothered about, oh, I'm trying to send this file to somebody in Lagos office or Banana, and this is happening. You can use the Azure Express Route. So we described the Azure DNS, the benefits of the DNS. One of the things is, this is the hosting service for DNS domains. DNS domains. If you remember the last class, I talked about domain name service, which is like the converter for your IP address to represent names, for your names to represent IP address. That's like the converter. I like to call it like that because sometimes people don't understand when you start to say, oh, the DNS is being, the DNS is not working, this is that. You just start to ask plenty questions. But when you say, imagine it as the converter of domain names to IPs. Yeah. So by hosting your domains in Azure, you can manage your DNS records using the same credentials. So you can host your domains. I don't know if you understand what we talk about domains. Many times we buy domain names. For example, we go to use HostGator, we use these hosting services such as HostGator. I used to use Namecheap. So these are hosting service company. What they do is that they provide you, and you can buy domain names from them. So for example, if we are buying cohort 6, www.cohort6 textilers. That's a .com. That's a commercial. .com is commercial. So we want to buy that domain name from Azure. So they say Azure DNS is a hosting service. So what this does is that, you see, it says it can manage your DNS records with using the same credentials. It can also manage your APIs, your tools, and billing as other Azure services. That's the benefit of the Azure DNS. One of the things is that it's reliable, it's secure, it's easy to use. You can customize your virtual networks. Let me just ask this question. Which Azure virtual machine features staggers updates across VMs based on their update domain and fault domain? If you remember, last class we talked about availability sets. We talked about skill sets. But anyway, let's move on. I don't know if anybody has an answer for this now, but let me. So I'll just because I didn't highlight. Let me highlight some of the things here, like in this question. Let me just go back and just look for gateways and talk about them, because we talked about that in the last class. Remember, we talked about gateways. And the reason we deploy them is like VPN gateways, express routes gateways can be deployed in a zone. It's for scalability and higher availability to virtual networks. It enables you to so what I like to say is like it's like as the term, the gateways to access regions, to access locations online. So imagine having a gateway, but you set up like an IP address with subnets to serve as your gateway. So okay, I was looking for VNet something. So let's go on to, it's good that you also take some of these questions, do some of these practice questions and submit answers, so that what time you would you'll be able to do some of the practical through Microsoft Learn. What's that? Okay. Last week we talked about this Azure machine, how to create it. So that's why I'm skipping. Or we had already Azure Virtual Desktop had already created that last week. Virtual containers created. Okay, I don't know. There'll be a class for these types of app services, web apps, mobile apps, API apps, web services. This is also a very interesting, part of this Azure class, of Azure classes. So we're going to work now. Based on the curriculum I'm taking, is Azure Virtual Networking. So this is where we are at now, isolation and segmentation. So the reason why this is important is because when you need to understand the networking part of Azure, because that is one of the key core services that Azure provides: computing, networking, database, and storage. So we have talked about storage, the accounts. Now we're talking about virtual, we're talking about networking, which is Azure Virtual Networking. Under the Azure Virtual Networking, some of the key networking capabilities. When we talk about the key networking capabilities, these are the isolation and segmentation, internet communications, communicate between Azure resources, communicate on-premises resources, that's the resources that are in the same location, within the same space, for example, maybe within the same region. Then route network traffic. We're talking about here, there has to be some load balancing. How does the traffic move? Filter network traffic. We're talking about the access list, the control you have put in place, firewalls, also VPNs. Then connect virtual networks. You can also talk about the VPNs when we talk about the connecting of virtual networks. All these are the functions, they're like the features that Azure Virtual Networks provides. So it's important that you understand what the features are so that you know what you are looking for, you know what to use it for at time. You understand isolation and segmentation, internet communications, communication between Azure resources, routes, how to route network traffic, how to communicate with on-premises resources, how to filter network traffic, how to connect virtual networks. Here, the first one, isolation, is creating multiple isolated virtual networks. So what happens is that when you want to set up a virtual network, you define a private IP address space by using public or private IP address ranges. In my, sorry, usually when you're creating a VNet, you have a resource group. You choose your IP address range and the version. There's IP version 6, IP version 4, based on what you're trying to achieve. The benefit of all this IP addressing is that sometimes the space you are looking for. So for example, if you use IP version 6, it has a default subnet with about 256 IPs that you can have access to. So if you're creating a small network, or maybe say 50 people, you don't need all that 256 IPs. So these 256 IPs that you get from maybe an IP version 4 range is something that you use for a larger VNet, where that's virtual network VNet, where you are dealing with different segments and different locations. So we have internet connections. You can enable internet connections by assigning a public address to an Azure resource, like I mentioned, or putting a resource behind a public load balancer. Remember that the load balancer helps you manage your traffic, and so the traffic is not conflicting. So that means information for Banana Island is not conflicting with information at Ikoyi office. Information in Yaba office is not conflicting with information or traffic coming from, it may be coming to the same server, or it may be coming on at different servers but different locations. using or different virtual machines. So what happens is you want your traffic not to conflict. That's what the load balancer can help you do. So communicate between Azure resources. So one of the things, virtual networks can connect not only virtual machines, but Azure resources. So note that when we talk about these virtual networks, it's not only virtual machines that can connect, it can connect Azure resources. What are these resources we are talking about? The ASEs, which is known as the App Service Environment for Power Apps. Then we have the Azure Kubernetes services. This one, the Linux. Then we have the Azure Virtual Machine skill sets. So these are some of the ways that your virtual networks can connect. So these are the resources. These are resources. Hope you know that this app service environment for Power Apps is a resource that is being used for building in Power Apps. If you've heard of Power Platform, the Power Apps, that's another product of Microsoft. Then the Azure Kubernetes service in the Azure Virtual Machine skill sets. These are resources that Azure has. If you remember that page where I brought up this. No, okay, it's not that one. Okay, let's just go on. It's so what we're talking about, communicate with on-premise resources. Azure Virtual Network enables you to link resources together in your on-premise environment and within your Azure subscription. Note that within your Azure subscription, you have, it enables you to link resources together. When we talk about linking of resources, so it means that I can link my app service environment, I can link my Azure Kubernetes service, I can link my Azure virtual machine skill sets together, all in one place because of Azure VNet. It helps you route network traffic, routing tables allows you to define rules on how your traffic should be directed. You can create custom routing tables. You have the border gateway protocol. It works with Azure VPN gateways, Azure route server, and the Azure Express route, which I explained earlier. So we have filtering of network traffic. These are features of the virtual network. You can connect virtual networks. You can connect virtual networks together by what is known as network peering. I'm sure you've seen what online, you've seen VNet peering. That is what enables you. What does this do? It allows you to connect two virtual networks to connect directly to each other. So, for example, I can have a network, a VNet that is set up in my Yaba office. I can have another VNet set up in my London office. So what I can do is I can use the VNet peering to enable these two, London and Yaba, for example, to communicate. One thing that happens is that the network between the two is now private, but it travels. This network is like, it's like you sending a letter, you're posting a letter. We don't really have post office services anymore, much like that. But imagine posting a letter from London to Lagos, and I'm using a private post office. That is what The network traffic between the paired network is private. That is what VNet does for you. And it travels on the Microsoft backbone network. That's how the post office is able to transfer the letter that I'm sending to Microsoft through Microsoft backbone network, and it's entering the public internet. So what happens is that when we talk about the public internet, we're referring to the fact that it is easily accessible on the internet by anybody. Once you have the URL, that's the unique resource locator. Hope you know what we talk about when we say the URL. So these virtual networks are very key. It's very key. We would just quickly look at how to create a VNet. I will call it a day. So I use this one because it should not give us virtual network. We have one existing here. I think we created in the last class. This is a new. Okay, but let me just create a new one. So this is it. I hope you know why we're creating a virtual network. Is because we're building a private network in Azure. Let me explain. It's the Azure virtual machines. If you want some of your virtual machines to communicate with each other, either over the internet or within the same location, for example, within the same network. This is why we set up virtual networks. So what we're saying is that we want maybe virtual machine A to communicate with virtual machine B in Yaba office. I want virtual machine A in Banana Island office to communicate with virtual machine B in Yaba office. So this is why we're setting up a virtual network. So like it rightly says here, it says VNet is similar to traditional network operating your data center. What brings about scalability, availability, and isolation. Scalability and isolation. So here we go. We start with very easy subscription, action package for lab. Maybe we should have gone back to our that's the subscription we're all using. We'll go back to RG1 as our resource group. Then we'll create a virtual network name, cohort 6. Then the region, let's get to South Africa this time around. Okay. So I have turn off. Then go to security. So we have the virtual network encryption. So traffic traveling within the same virtual network is encrypted. But traffic that is going to IP addresses, public IP addresses, is not encrypted. So we can leave it blank, although I like to always put my virtual network encryption to enable traffic. Then the Azure Bastion is a paid service that secures your RDP, remote desktop protocol connectivity to your virtual machines over TLS. So what this Azure Bastion does is that if I enable it now, it means that I can remotely connect. I don't know how many people have used PuTTY before for network connections, PuTTY, or have used or like this other one. What's that? CBN. CBN enables you to. So there are these virtual network tools that you can use to access devices remotely. And so Azure Bastion is a paid service that enables you to do that. Then we have the Azure firewall. We leave the firewall because, okay, well, it's important to have it in place because you don't want hackers and code to get into your network. See, network security service, network security service. Then we have the Azure DDoS network protection. I like to enable this this protection plan. I don't have a protection plan. Let me see. I can create, but let me leave it. So all this based on what you're, but because we're just creating a simple network between maybe you and I, not something out of our company, something within our organization. We're not going to do so much here. So now we have the IP address, the subnets. So we're using we say we're adding an IP version here. Okay, let's just use the default. The default gives you can see what the default is, 256 IP addresses. That's what the default is. But if we're doing something, since we're trying to do something smaller, because of the time, I would have said we'll start to do some subnets here to edit. You can see the edit button where you get to edit, and you can now change your what's it called, your subnet range. So here, maybe I just want 8. Here, I want 8 addresses, so I'll just choose the /29. And then I'm using an IP version 4 address range because it's cheaper, and because of the scalability, like because of the number of people I'm dealing with, I'm not dealing with so many people. I'm just dealing with maybe 50 users. Then maybe only out of the 50 users, or okay, let me use 64. So that makes more sense. 64. So the private network enable private subnets. Yeah, yes. No default outbound access. Yes. What else? Okay, so this is what we see here. Then we review. So now you can see our IP has gone to 65,000. Wow, this is a lot. Why do we? Okay. I wanted that. Okay, I see what happened. I changed the name. I want to use a higher this thing. Let's just go back to this for submit. So you can see this here. It says the address prefix overlaps with virtual network cohorts VNet that we created earlier. So we want to increase our own. So we want to increase our own to 14. Let me go back 16. Yeah. So that's why it's increase it to 16/16 subnets. Okay, so we will review and read. So running validation. So you see here, we already have our subscription, resource group, the name, the region, security, we disabled everything. But if you want to activate the Azure firewall, you can enable it. You can enable the DDoS network protection, and you can also change the IP address. The subnet here, it has been enabled. So deployment in progress. Okay, I can pin this to our dashboard to just show how some of the activities we've done. Or I can go to resource. Let me go to resource so that you can see some of them. So right now, if you see, we have DNS servers, Azure provided DNS service. See our virtual network ID. This is the virtual network ID here. This is our subscription ID. Note that the address space is a /16 subnet. So you can see here, paired network address space gives us as much as 65,536 addresses available to us. So let me delete that so that it doesn't do too much. Okay, let me delete both. So in this class today, if you notice, we've created a virtual network, created a resource group, containers, and we've created our storage accounts. The storage accounts with the containers in it. In next classes, we'll talk about the Azure AI services. So I think that's next. But, okay. But one thing you should understand, in our class today, we've talked about virtual networks. As you can see, we've created it. We've created storage accounts, as you can see, all tying to your virtual machine. So we would okay. Okay. So it launches specialized virtual machines using subnet. So it's like the subnet you create for your virtual machine. Let me see that example. Okay, so we already did that here. So you see this public IP address. Okay. So the virtual network subnets. So we had created a VNet, right? Earlier. So you can see that under this virtual network slash subnet, we were using cohort 6 VNet default. So we have connected to this virtual machine using a subnet through the subnet. And that's what Azure refers to as the Azure Virtual Network Gateway. And if we want to configure this here, the domain name, you can configure it to face the internet. You can configure it to be internal. When I mean you can configure it to face the internet, you can configure it to be internal. What I mean is that we can create a connection that would make it face the internet. On the other side that faces, that's the public DNS. You can create the public DNS and we can create the private DNS. The difference between the two is that one is facing the internet, the public. So usually when you go around, you see public IP address, public DNS. Usually what it refers to is that it is pointing towards the internet. The records point towards the internet. And then when we talk about the private, means that it's internally facing, means that it's facing something that's within the same space, within the same region, maybe the same company that has the same network. And we want to look at a virtual machine in one location to another location, but it's the same network. That's when we talk about the private. So we know that, just a reminder, we know that VPNs extend your private networks across public network. So what the VPNs do is it enables users to send and receive data across the shared connection. And just as a reminder, remember that from a desktop, from like this system I'm using now, you have your load balancer. You are sending traffic, for example, to your load balancer, then it goes to the server, then it goes to maybe your database or your file system. And like from the database, it comes out again through your server to your load balancer and to me, based on how you configure your network. Or that's the normal flow. And let me just say that's the normal flow. So one of the good things about subnet you have to understand is that subnet can be used to define your routing table. It can define different kinds of workloads based on the kind of workload that you're trying to work on, based on the kind of network you're trying to create. That's what your subnet will determine. That's what will determine your subnet. If you remember earlier when I created the subnet, I was telling you about the fact that we're just dealing with about 50 people, even though I later changed it to a subnet that was higher. But because I just felt let's try a higher this thing. But what the idea is, you need to understand how to that's the bit of networking you need to understand when you're talking about virtual machines, VNets. Because when you want to start connecting different networks across regions, across locations, that's where we talk about regional VNet peering, global VNet peering, and all the likes. Those ones are tied to the kind of location you are connecting your virtual network to. So one of the key things I want you to take away is that always make sure that the location and the size of the kind of network you are configuring is at the back of your mind. You understand it very well. You know what it is. You know the size. You know the kind of data that would also be passing through. So that way you know the size you are dealing with, the IP addresses, the subnets, and how to structure your gateways. So One of the things about gateways is also that you can set rules on them. Rules like don't allow people to download audio on this network. Don't allow people to download videos on this network. You can allow rules that allow traffic from entering and leaving your subnets. That's one of the good things of your network security gateway and other gateways, virtual network gateways. They're just there to enable you set rules of how the network works. That's what the gateways are. Sure. That's what most internet gateways are for. So I think that is key and that is important. If that is well understood, I hope it is. So okay. So one of the things, someone will say, how do my VMs, virtual machines in different locations, how can I make my virtual machines in different locations connect? Or, how will they communicate? Simply put, it is your network interface that does that using IP protocols. You can set up the network interface with the network gateways so that they are able to, your virtual machine in Yaba is able to connect to the virtual machine in Banana Island, for example. So, okay, I think that is pretty much all, because one of the things you need to just in the whole of networking is considering in Azure is your address spaces, your routing tables, and your subnets. So you know what you're dealing with and the size of users and IP addressing you're going to create. So I think those are the basic things that need to be understood properly and well. So you know that we are not just you don't create a network that and then understand your traffic. So where load balancing comes into play. Okay, I think I'm done with these explanations. I just wanted to highlight them again and remind people. So thank you for joining this class. I hope it has been impactful to you and useful to you. Someone kill me. Yes, it's possible to manage traffic in Azure without load balancing. You can use Azure Traffic Manager. It uses a routing table, yeah. DNS-based routing, yes. Yes, you can. It's possible.
Okay. So in addition to that, right, there are different needs. You might have different needs, and your needs will determine also the technologies and the resources or solutions that will really solve your problem, right? So if load balancing will come in most of the time, if you have multiple servers, for instance, multiple servers hosting the same services, then it's important you have a load balancer that help you to load balance traffic. So what it's doing, what the load balancer is doing, which has explained a lot where, is helping you to balance the traffic. So for instance, you have a website, an e-commerce site that you have set up, and you know during Christmas is always very, very heavy, right? Traffic is always heavy on that particular e-commerce site. So now, in order to accommodate the traffic for each festive season, you set up the Azure, the e-commerce servers to be multiple. So if you recall last week, one of the things Tosin touched was having when you're setting up your virtual machine, you select zones, right? And then you make it highly available. So it creates multiple copies of your VM in different zones. So likewise, if you have that e-commerce website and you need to always prepare for heavy traffic period, then you have to configure it in a way that it can add additional server to the server as the need base. But what if, for instance, I have just two servers hosting the same exact service? And now this server that is hosting the same exact service, every time request come, only one server is responding to that request. So it's as good as what as will have just have one server if I will not balance the traffic in such a way that one server does not get overwhelmed with traffic. So that's in the cases or in scenario where you will need a load balancer to help you say, when traffic come from session one, traffic come, send it to server one, session two, send it to server two. There are different configuration that you also need to do when you configure the load balancer. You can do what we call the round robin. Then there's there's layer 4 load balancing, and there's layer 7 load balancing. Layer 4 is doing just using just DNS round robin. Layer 7 will go in depth, go even up to the level of the application itself, right? So, but traffic manager now can help you to manage traffic in such a way that if you have resources in different location or different region, you can choose to say, if user want to access maybe resource one, this does not necessarily mean you have two servers running the same exact service. It might mean you have resource, maybe a primary resource in one location, in one region, a backup resource or standby resource in another location. So you can configure your traffic manager to say, oh, every time user want to access traffic, always send them to this particular server or this particular location, right? And then you can also use it to do a bit of to do load balancing as well. But each of them have their own unique use cases, right? Just for you to understand that. Yes. Is it also possible to see the traffic passing through my VNet to enable me analyze them? Yes, yes, yes. When we get to monitoring, you'll be able to see that. Yes, you can see traffic that is passing through. You can enable monitoring using either Azure Monitor. There are different monitoring technologies that you can use or features in Azure. And there are also third party that are also hosted on Azure that you can leverage on. Yes, you can see them. That's the short answer to your question. So